Hello, and welcome to the Achieve Optimum Health Summit, where we explore how to prevent and reverse chronic illness. I'm Angelina Kardash, your summit host. And today, my guest is Dr. John Douillard. Dr. John is a globally recognized leader in the fields of natural health, Ayurveda, and sports medicine. He is a creator of LifeSpa.com. It's a leading Ayurvedic health and wellness resource on the web. Dr. John is former nutritionist for the New Jersey Nets NBA team and author of the 7 health books, including bestseller Eat Wheat and the 3 Seasons Diet. He is an author of the 7 online courses, including new yoga journal course Ayurveda 201 on Ayurvedic psychology, and he has been in practice for over 30 years. So welcome, Dr. John, and I'm so excited to host you here on my summit.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And today I would like us to talk about the prevention of chronic diseases with Ayurveda. So please tell us about yourself and your journey to becoming interested in Ayurveda.
Well, the thing about Ayurveda, it means the science of life, which is sort of interesting because that means living in sync with the natural cycles of nature, which is now Nobel Prize winning science called circadian medicine. So this was something that Ayurveda talked about as a fundamental practice: to eat the right time of day, to go to sleep at the right time of day. All the rhythms of nature need to be in sync. We need to be in sync with those. So that's one definition of Ayurveda, is the science of life, living in sync and in harmony, going downstream with the current of nature versus, as many of us feel like, we're paddling upstream against the current and feeling exhausted at the end of every day, living for the weekend kind of a thing. And then there's the other definition of Ayurveda, which is as important, which is that Ayur means life and Veda means truth. So it has to do with bringing your body back into balance to reveal the truth of you. The truth of you, meaning that inside of all of us is this incredible capacity for joy and love and care and appreciation of others. But then we have this crazy world we live in. We have a mind that armors us up and protects us at all costs. And that is actually in Ayurveda the cause of disease, is the emotional blocking, the mental and emotional stress that impacts our digestive system, that actually causes a lot of the distress that we experience in our world. So that's kind of the cool thing. It's like this incredible understanding of lifestyle, Nobel Prize winning circadian medicine. But then on the other side, it's all about, really understanding what we're here to really do, is to sort of raise our mental vibration, our executive functioning, as well as reach our full human potential, and break the pattern of living the same old emotional stressors, doing the same dumb thing again and again and again, based on impressions we experience in the first 6 years of life. Now, many of us know that in the first 6 years of life, science tells us that those impressions make up 95% of the things we think and say and do as adults. So many of us are walking around sort of unconscious, armored up, reacting to our world based on protective survival impressions. And Ayurveda was like, we can do way better than that. We can rise up above the survival emotional traumas and reactive behavioral traits and free ourselves from that. So that was the second definition, which is the, Ayur meaning life, Veda meaning truth, really living the truth of your life. So it's really kind of a very cool concept that I think we're just beginning to understand today. Dr. Dean Ornish is really interesting. He talks a lot about the fact that the joy that we have is inside of all of us, and we've just covered it all up. That's a classic Ayurvedic understanding, and that's what Ayurveda is really about. So that's the reason why I'm so passionate about Ayurveda, because what I do at lifespa.com is I take the ancient Ayurvedic wisdom and I translate it into modern science by citing the new modern science studies that back the ancient wisdom. And it's a phenomenal amount of research that's been done to prove these ancient principles. So when you take science alone, you can kind of prove whatever you want. And in the plant-based world, there's incredibly good science to prove a plant-based diet. But you know, when you watch the keto podcast and the paleo podcast, and you know, they cite science too, you know. So it's very confusing for the consumer to know, what do I eat, you know? And that's where I love to take the ancient wisdom and tie that to modern science. And when you put the two together, you sort of hedge your bet a little bit. You have more information that's reliable. You have time-tested wisdom and modern science. And that, I think that's something for us to at least look at. And that's the Ayurvedic way.
So what I've heard that is basically the way of being, right, can enhance our life. So having, you know, loving relationship with our closed one, with our loved ones. So that creates a, you know, vibrant life for us. And those, I call it limiting beliefs, right, that we all have up until age 6, as you said, right? I mean, they really prevent us from being in a way at the highest level of connection and communication with the closed ones. So, and
right.
This is what can be enhanced.
So to start the process, Ayurveda says that the emotions we feel in our heart, and those emotions are carried, it's called sadhaka, pitta, it's carried to our brain through a certain type of vata, and it's recorded in the brain in something called tarpaka, which means to record. And these impressions are said to be recorded on the white matter of the brain, the myelin sheaths, which are very soft and sort of waxy. And it's written that those impressions are there. So if you walked into a cave when you were, you know, a cave woman thousands of years ago, and a bear came out chasing you, you could be 95 years old and go back to that cave and you would know and remember that bear because those impressions were written part of your survival. So we live based on a lot of our decisions, behaviors based on that kind of survival. But Ayurveda designed techniques to erase those emotional impressions. And there's really good science, and I've been writing a lot about this lately. There's techniques, yoga, breathing techniques, kumbhaka, intermittent hypoxic techniques, as well as even vibrational techniques like chanting. All of them have been shown to increase neuroplasticity, which is the rewriting of emotional patterns of the brain. So like I said in the beginning, Ayurveda is like, we're going to do yoga, breathing, meditation, even chanting or pray or prayer, however you like to look at it. But those repetitive vibrations, you know, it's sort of like if you have an emotional pattern and you write it in the sand and then you vibrate the sand, it's gone. In a similar way, that the Ayurvedic techniques were designed to rewrite those emotional impressions. And what they found recently in the University of Virginia about 10, 15 years ago was that there are lymphatics in the brain that drain 3 pounds of plaque out of your head every year while you sleep. And they're linked to, when they're congested, to emotional trauma, anxiety, depression, cognitive decline, inflammation, infection, and even autoimmune diseases. And Ayurveda talked about those brain lymphs thousands of years ago. They said they were right across the top of the head like a mohawk haircut, the sagittal and transverse sinuses. That's exactly where they found them. And Ayurveda developed techniques to clean out those brains. Different techniques like sniffing medicated oils. Turns out that these brain lymphs drain 50% into the lymphs in your nose. So they had all these therapies, and I've written about them, to clean out the brain so the brain is not sending a stressed emergency survival message to the gut. Because as you know, the gut-brain axis is bidirectional. So what you think your gut feels and what your gut feels, you think. So we live oftentimes in a world where we're extremely stressed, reactive to our environment, finding our contentment, like you said, through reward chemistry. If I buy something, I feel good temporarily, where Ayurveda was like, you know, the transition is to learn how to, instead of needing to be loved and appreciated and approved of, to actually be the love. And that's where you begin to fill yourself up. So the whole Ayurvedic model starts with understanding that it's this crazy mind of ours that plows through our intestinal tract, takes out our digestion, alters our ability to digest certain foods, and then forces us to oftentimes eat a restricted diet or take foods out of the diet or just make us feel really, really bad, indigestion and things like that. So that's kind of the first piece of the Ayurvedic puzzle, is to unravel the mental, emotional stress. Instead of unconsciously doing the same dumb stuff again and again in your life based on childlike impressions, but to actually free yourself and become conscious again. And then you start to change the neuroplasticity. The thoughts you're having are constantly plowing through your intestinal tract, taking out your good bugs every time you think those repetitive, stressful thoughts. And we all have them, right? And that's the cool thing about Ayurveda. It was about like, hey, let's start from where it really starts, which is our mental and emotional stress.
Right, right. That's very interesting. Can you actually improve brain performance with Ayurvedic techniques?
The science is very clear. Your brainwave patterns change, you become more alpha. You function from a more alpha, calm brainwave state with yoga, breathing, and meditation. It's all been shown. Meditation, again, Nobel Prize winning science by Elizabeth Blackburn, did research on the telomeres. And the longer your telomeres, the chromosomal caps are linked to longevity. And stress shortens them and shortens your longevity. So she did research on meditation and found out that that will actually lengthen your telomeres. Yoga, the breathing techniques, the pranayama techniques, the intermittent hypoxia, you know, the idea of doing pranayama techniques with comfortable breath holds is now unbelievably loaded with new science. In fact, when you do intermittent hypoxia, which is exactly what pranayama exercises were about, studies show that it actually increases your EPO, your erythropoietin, which is the chemical that Lance Armstrong lost his 7 World Cup or his Tour de France victories from, because he was injecting EPO. But you can now, with intermittent hypoxia, make it yourself. You can, with breath holds, ancient Vedic technique, it increases stem cells. It increases nitric oxide, another Nobel Prize winning panacea molecule back in 1998. It increases something called VEGF, which is the vasal endothelial growth factor to support the health of your lining of your arteries, as well as something called a transcription factor 53, which is called the guardian of the genome. And this all happens when you do breathing techniques with breath holding. And pranayama, prana means breath, and yama is misinterpreted oftentimes, but that yama means to pause. So it's all, the whole definition of pranayama was to pause your breath. And now the science is just outstanding, not to mention the brainwave patterns being slowed down. So you function from that calm place. I call it the eye of the storm. The bigger the calm that you can create inside, the more powerful your winds. But most of us are living in the winds of the storm, getting beaten up by flying pine trees and refrigerators and just exhausted through our day. But it's like pulling back the bow. When we pull back the bow and start to establish silence, being calm through prayer or meditation, you start to function from that storm. And the bigger the eye, the more powerful the wind. So that's the key. And of course, you know that all that stress plows right through your intestinal microbiome. And if I was sitting next to someone who is super stressed out, a social disruptor, they call it in the science, my bugs in my gut would change and get super stressed out based on me just sitting next to a stressed out person. And then my gut would send that message to my brain and tell me that this is stressful. And I was now living in an emergency state, which is a fight or flight state, which tells me not to digest my food. And you start to have the beginning of the breakdown. In addition, those bugs that carry that emotional stress and the bugs that would carry pesticides or other kinds of stressors, they do something called horizontal transfer of genetic material, which means that the bugs, if you spray them with a pesticide or you stress them out and alter their genetic, mutate them in some way, that mutated information transfers through our intestinal tract to our genetic code. And it lets us know, the body says, hey, there's some weird pesticides and some weird stress out there. You guys better get your act together and figure out how to do that, because if you don't and we die, the bugs lose their home. So they're sending this message to keep us alive for their well-being. And so it's all based on these extremely subtle impressions that Ayurveda mapped out thousands of years ago. They called this lifestyle of being loving and kind and giving something called sattvic. And it's where you, like I said, you You feel good by giving and loving and caring. You be the love versus need the love. And then if you don't experience that, and we go into our cultural way of being, which is, reward chemistry. I work really hard, I get the money, I go shopping, I get a reward, I buy a house, I get a car. We just keep, amping up the need for a bigger and better reward. And that's called rajasic behavior. And we become addicted to that reward chemistry. And the more that you stimulate, the more of a stimulant you need to get the same reward. Where studies show when you give and you love and you care, you produce a hormone called oxytocin, which is the longevity hormone. And the more you give, the more oxytocin you make, the more you make. There's no limit. When you produce dopamine, or reward chemistry, the more you stimulate, of course, the more stimulant you need. Where oxytocin, the more you love, the more you get. It never ends. So it's just a beautiful understanding. And there's so many studies backing up the idea that a sattvic lifestyle with, techniques to unravel the mental emotional trauma is the first step to fixing your digestion, and then that translates back into diet. And of course, Ayurveda was all about a plant-based diet for thousands of years. That was the absolute premise of, maybe where the vegetarian diets maybe even came from, was in India,
Right. Yeah. So, I truly aligned with this. It's like, living with generosity brings people just extraordinary life, and creating, like a health and loving connection with, with the universe. Let me ask you about meditation, because a lot of people are honestly trying to learn how to meditate, but it is not an easy task. And when I just started my meditation practice, I couldn't even sit still long enough. So what is the advice that you can give to our viewers for the meditation techniques?
I think, it's interesting. I think meditation, the science is so unbelievable with meditation, but few people stick with it. And I think that's where the breathing comes in. Even the yoga, which is one form of exercise, but even just exercise has incredible benefit. But the yoga, the breathing, and the meditation, they come into a package. And when you breathe and you learn how to, suspend your breath, you get higher brainwave functioning. You get better executive functioning, better memory, better clarity. You get, stem cells, EPO, nitric oxide, all these incredible, repair factors in your body come when you learn how to suspend your breath. And that changes your brainwave function, which is literally a higher vibration, because now your brainwaves are vibrational. So now all of a sudden you're functioning at a level where you're not all wrapped up with incessant thinking, constantly living the peaks and the valleys of survival. You're above the fray, and you're not, dipping in and dipping out, thinking, oh my God, this stress, I got to do this tomorrow, I got to do this, and I got to do this. That's why people stop meditating, because they can't stop their thinking. But the breathing, that's exactly what it does. If you do some of the breathing techniques that I write about on my website, you do them, you just stop breathing. We have a technique called the 1-minute meditation, which is just 30 seconds of a bellows breath, followed by being still for 30 seconds. And instantly, I do this in my seminars all the time, and instantly everybody stops thinking. So I think the meditation alone is a bit challenging, can be done for sure, but I think the compliance would be way better if people would actually put the whole package together, as opposed to just taking one piece.
Mm-hmm. So since on this summit, we talk a lot about the prevention of chronic disease. So can you tell us how Ayurveda addresses chronic disease?
Well, the cause of disease in Ayurveda is one thing. It's what's called the mistake of the intellect, where the mind started thinking of itself as separate from the whole. In other words, the body works as the whole, like the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And this was a very important understanding in Ayurveda and how that works. But when the mind starts thinking, oh, I need this for reward, I need to make this money, I need to do this, we lose connection to the whole. Basically, stress creates isolation and separation. So how do you fix that? Like we had just talked about, dealing with some of the emotional stress. But remember that emotional stress plows through your intestinal tract too. And the intestinal lining, this is the cause of 85% of all disease in Ayurveda is caused by digestive issues. One study showed that 74% of all Americans experience some type of digestive distress, eliminative distress, abdominal discomfort or something. So that's like almost everybody. So the intestinal tract is sort of like the three little bears. It can't be too dry or constipated, it can't be too wet or loose or mucousy, it has to be just right. The lining of your intestinal tract is lined by your lymphatic system, which is the largest circulatory system of your body. And the lymph has little collecting ducts inside your intestinal tract that do three things. And this is why this is the cause of disease in Ayurveda. The lymph system, when that intestinal tract gets irritated, we have something called leaky gut. And the lymph system is the big garbage can. So if you have undigested proteins and undigested fats, wheat and dairy that wasn't broken down properly, or environmental pollutants as fat-soluble chemicals that ended up in your small intestine, they end up to be too big to get into your blood and feed you as nutrition. They get uptaken into the collecting ducts of your lymphatic system, and the lymph gets congested. Now, the lymphs are trying to do three things. One, carry your entire immune system. Two, it is the delivery of broken down fats into the monoglyceride form as baseline energy to every cell of your body. And of course, it's the garbage can. So if your lymph system gets clogged up by poor upper digestion, and all those undigested foods find their way into your lymphatic system, those undigested particles will store in the fat around your belly. And that's hard science. It's also hard science to show that when you don't break down the proteins and fats, they will get taken to the collecting ducts of the garbage can in your lymph, clog up your lymph. Now you have lymphs in your brain, draining 3 pounds of chemicals and plaque every year. And when that gets congested, it does the things that I mentioned, which is creates a lot of emotional, traumatic, cognitive stress. We have lymphs underneath our skin. We can cause skin rashes, hives, things like that. You have lymphs that drain your joints. We can create arthritis. We have lymphs in our respiratory tract, creating other types of allergies. Everywhere you have skin in your body, you have lymphatic drains. So if the drains are clogged, so an Ayurvedic concept is the very first thing that we treat is the drainage system, the ability to move waste out first. So if you can't get the trash out of your house, you're in big trouble over time. So the first system that we evaluate is the quality of the lymphatic system. So that's one thing that we look at, make sure the drains are clogged. So if your lymphatic system is stuck in traffic and your brain lymphs, which is the master computer, has congested lymphatics, which are the brain lymphatics, and that's linked to autoimmunity, your brain, which is the master computer, doesn't really know how many fire trucks to send to the fire on Broadway. It doesn't know if to send 1, 2, or 100, and that's what an autoimmune reaction is. We now have, according to the science, a mechanism for autoimmunity, which we never had before, but it's buried in the journals and it'll be years before it reaches medical practice. Ayurveda understood that thousands of years ago, that there were brain lymphs and there were techniques to clean them out. And so understanding how when your drains are clogged, you know, you're going to have congestion, you're going to build up impurities and toxins in your body, and they are the cause, a foundational cause of disease. Now, when your lymphatic system gets congested, there's a default process. The default is the impurities leave your intestinal tract and they go to your liver. It's called the enteric cycle. Now, your liver is a detox organ, it's a manufacturing site, but it also has a lot to do with your digestion. Your liver makes bile, and the bile is one of the major buffers for the acid in your stomach. So if you eat, and I'll just say this, even though I know it's a plant-based audience, you eat a ham sandwich, okay? No one was gonna eat that, I know that, but let's say you eat a ham sandwich, right? Your stomach's gonna say, okay, I have a ham sandwich here. I need a certain amount of acid to break down the gluten in the bread, which is a hard to digest protein. And I'm gonna therefore need a certain amount of bile from my liver to emulsify that, to neutralize the acid that my stomach needs to make to cook the gluten, right? I also need a certain amount of bile to emulsify the fat in the ham, or the fat from the coal mine plumes of mercury that are on every organic vegetable. I'm gonna need a certain amount of bile for that too. So the stomach sends a message to the liver, I need 3 ounces of bile, and the liver, because the lymph has been congested for so long, the bowel function has been altered for so long, the liver became a dumping ground, the bile became thick and viscous and sludgy. So the liver says, I don't have that kind of bile. So the stomach says, no problem. I'll hold on to all the food and all the acid until you guys turn the green light on for me. And if that green light doesn't go on, the stomach holds on to the acid and the ham sandwich, and you get heartburn and indigestion and gas and bloating. All these symptoms come. And over time, your stomach says, you know what? He hasn't made the bile like he made in the years ago in a long, long time. So since you have turned down the amount of bile that you make because your liver is so congested, I'm going to turn down the amount of acid that I make. So all of a sudden, your stomach starts making less digestive acid or fire. Your liver has made less bile. So now your body says, he'll figure out what he can eat and what he can't eat. So all of a sudden, with no acid, you can't digest wheat, dairy, nuts, seeds, grains, legumes, beans, lectins. So that's why there's so many books out, not so many, but some books out saying that lectins are bad and all these foods are bad. They're not bad. They're actually just a little bit harder to digest. And because your body was protecting its own self, because if it let that acid go into the small intestine unbuffered, it would burn a hole through your intestinal tract or ulcerate your lining. And the body doesn't want to do that. So it'll just says, I just won't make any acid. And then now we start letting a lot more of those undigested proteins and fats go into the intestinal tract. Again, science says too big to get into your blood. They clog up your lymphatic system. And now you have, however you're genetically predisposed to break down, whether it's arthritis or bloating or weight around your belly or cellulite or inflammation, pain, discomfort, sleep issues. Because when your brain lymphatics get congested, that directly impacts your circadian rhythms, your sleep, your hormones, your ability to detoxify. So it all comes from that. And along the way, of course, we don't even notice it until we find out that we can't digest certain foods. Or we just say, oh, I just don't eat wheat and I feel so much better. Well, that's not a solution. That's just saying, I took the hard to digest food out of my stomach and I feel better. But what about all the environmental pollutants, which are really hard to break down, and we have the capacity to detoxify those with strong digestion. So one of the things you want to make sure of if we're eating a plant-based diet, that we're really eating it for the right reasons, not because I couldn't digest X, Y, and Z, because it's absolutely the healthiest diet for me, as opposed to just eating it because I can't eat those foods. We need to go back and reboot digestive strength, because one other study showed that the foods that are so-called irritants, like wheat and dairy and nuts and seeds and lectins and things like that, they're hard to digest proteins, like goitrogens and nightshades and oxalates. They're all, harder to digest foods for a lot of people, but they irritate the intestinal tract, and that irritation, called hormesis or the hygiene hypothesis, has been shown to be the reason why we have gut immunity, which is 70% of our immune reaction. So if you just say, I'm not going to eat anything hard to digest, and I eat all this pre-digested food, you lose the reason for gut immunity, and the science is in. Studies show people who eat wheat have 4 times less mercury in their blood than people who are gluten-free. Science shows that people who eat wheat have 4 times more good bugs than people who are gluten-free, and people who eat wheat have 4 times less bad bugs than people who are gluten-free, and more mercury as well when they're gluten-free. Big Harbor studies show that people who eat the most wheat have the less heart disease and the less diabetes. I had a big debate with Dr. David Perlmutter twice, actually. We debated on the issues between, is wheat really the cause of this problem, or is it the processed nature of the wheat that we're eating? And when they put highly processed polyunsaturated fatty acids that are bleached, boiled, and deodorized in a loaf of bread, the loaf of bread will stay squishy for months. When I grew up, a loaf of bread would get hard by the end of the day, and the baker would give it away, and they'd make new bread the next day. The oil that they put in is a preservative to extend the shelf life, not our life. And when you eat those foods with all those preservatives, particularly the polyunsaturated fatty acids that the bugs won't eat on the counter, then where does all that bad oil go when you eat it? Your bugs in your gut won't eat it either, so all the oil goes to your liver. That's the oil center. So all that impossible to digest and break down polyunsaturated, highly processed oil, the cooking oils, go right to your liver. And today we have the #1 abdominal surgery in America today. Gallbladder removal is the #1 abdominal surgery in America. And the gallbladder regulates your ability. It's like the bile, it regulates your bile flow, which is like a Pac-Man that cleans your villi and scrubs it. It regulates the consistency of your stool, your constipation or your elimination. And the bile is the buffer for the acid. So if you no bile, because of all the congestion, no acid. No acid, you're not going to cook the proteins and you're going to feel really bad when you eat them. And if you're a plant-based person, those plant-based proteins, they really need to be broken down completely. And that's why a lot of people, not a lot, but it is a thing where people will go on a plant-based diet and they end up being what they call protein deficient. And it's not because the plants don't deliver the proteins, it's because they just simply don't have the digestive strength to get the nutrition that they need out of a plant-based diet. So this is where chronic disease comes in. You know, anybody going from a meat-eating diet to a plant-based diet is going to feel a million times better, pretty much across the board. But then you have to make sure that you don't, that you really address the underlying weak link of your individual digestive system, because thousands of years of time-tested science, Ayurveda, says that it all starts in your digestion. So what I do in my book, Eat Wheat, and on my website, we have thousands of articles that are free about how to reset and to run a fine-tooth comb and troubleshoot your digestive system to make sure that you're not, you know, thinking, oh, I just don't eat this and don't eat that and everything's fine. Well, you know, that means your ability to detoxify is compromised. And now we're in harm's way without even realizing it 10, 20 years down the road. See, that's not good enough.
It's very interesting. What is your opinion on liver cleanse, which includes, let's say, using castor oil as a laxative to empty the colon, and different herbs which supposedly help detoxification and bile acid production? And I know that the protocol also calls for multiple enemas to keep removing bile from the colon. So just from the Ayurvedic perspective, what do you think? Is there some wisdom to it?
For sure. And you know, there's a lot of liver cleanses that have hit the web over the years using Epsom salts and lots of olive oil and those kinds of things. And they can be very valuable, but they're really harsh. They're very aggressive. And, you know, I learned that technique way back when I was in school in 1981. Mm-hmm. And I have written over thousands of articles, but I never put that cleanse on my website for free because it wasn't for anyone, anytime. You really needed to be careful because it's very aggressive, and it can, if you push all your bile out of your liver, you can be very depleted for a long time, and there are casualties. So I ended up writing an ebook called the Safe Liver Cleansing ebook, which has a 1-month protocol of liver preparation before you would do a liver cleanse like that, because they are valuable, but you need to make sure you do it the right way and first do no harm. And I would end up treating so many patients who did these cleanses when they weren't ready, and they ended up feeling exhausted, depleted, even depressed for a very long time. And so I finally put that cleanse on my website for free, but with this 1-month preparatory process. And if you fail the prep tests, there's tests you have to pass before you can do it. Otherwise, you can actually, you know, cleansing is great, but you can't cleanse yourself into an exhaustive state. It's not all about cleansing. It's about restoring function. The reason why people get toxic in the first place is because their digestion broke down. Sure. And then their body just put the toxins in their fat, you know, in their brain, wherever, as a storage place, because it didn't know what to do with it. Then all of a sudden we just clean it out. We never addressed the reason why it got stored in the fat in the first place. We haven't done the patient justice. And that's where we come from. Ayurvedic, they were all about reset digestive strength, reset liver function, reset lymphatic function, clean out the brain lymphatics, even unravel old emotional trauma. So you really have a clean slate of understanding the upstream causes before you just go get in there and just start cleaning the body out and detoxing. It's a very American thing to do. Let's just cleanse until we, you know, scrub it till it's clean and it'll be good. Well, a lot of times the intestinal tract, for example, is so delicate. You know, I was, you know, met Dr. Bernard Jensen many years ago, who was all about colonics and climas and all that. And there were a lot of casualties from all the colonics if they weren't done correctly. And then when I went to India to study Ayurveda, they would use not water in the intestinal tract, they would cook herbs in oils for days and days, and they would put these very gentle herbs with oils and soothe and lubricate the intestinal lining. And that's what the bugs eat, turns out. They eat oil, not water. So they would feed the intestinal tract and treat it with very kid gloves and care for it very gently and kindly without being very aggressive. And that's the Ayurvedic approach, is don't be killing things. You know, now SIBO is like the new thing. Everybody kills it with rifaximin and the new antibiotic, and they get better for 3 months, but I swear, they all come back and I treat them on an unfortunately very regular basis. And they all were better for 3 months, and then the problem came back. Because we just, when they were, you know, with the machine gun and we were just killing things. The intestinal tract is so delicate. And that's where Ayurveda was so profound in its understanding. They talked about bugs thousands of years ago. They called them krimi. And they said, when you treat these invisible microbes, they called them, you have to care for them by changing the environment of the host and changing the environment of the microbe itself, as opposed to killing it. There was no mention of killing. It was to create an environment that supports the good, and then the good take care of the bad, which we now know to be true, but we're still using antibiotics to kill thousands of strains of bugs to kill just one. It's a little bit, and of course it saves lives. Don't get me wrong. Absolutely needed when it's needed, but it's overuse. And in natural medicine, harsh herbs are overused, which make the symptoms better for a spell, but they oftentimes make the cause worse.
You've mentioned that Ayurvedic medicine can be aligned with whole food plant-based lifestyle, but how important is ghee, which is a clarified cow milk butter, in Ayurvedic medicine?
Well, you know, as a pure vegan, obviously you wouldn't want to be eating ghee, clarified butter, but when you look at what ghee is, all the milk solids have been boiled off, and you're looking at the highest source of butyric acid. Butyric acid is the #1 fatty acid that feeds your microbes, your colon cells, and your gut immunity. And there's microbes in our guts that literally make butyric acid for a living, which is, and the highest source of butyric acid on the planet is ghee. So there was some reason and some logic for that. Someone figured out a long time ago, 1,000 years ago, to take milk, boil off all the milk solids, and end up with this pure golden fatty acid, which has no milk solids or dairy product in it any longer. So from that perspective, it's about as vegan as you can get without being vegan. However, you can use other fats that are plant-based. You know, if you want olive oil, you know, other ones as well. And there's a lot of vegans who don't like to use oils at all either. And that's, of course, you know, there's a lot of controversy in the scientific arena about that. But I think that the one thing about the plant-based diet that is absolutely crystal clear, and we're talking about 100% plant-based diet, no oil and all that, is it's the only diet that's ever been proven to cure heart disease. It's the only one. So, you know, that goes a long way. And I think that's something that has to be understood. And then from there, you know, individuals find out how plant-based do they do. Do they do plant-based with a little bit of oil, more nuts and seeds and things like that? And then you kind of discover what your individual needs are. But Ayurveda was a mostly plant-based diet. They did use some dairy products, but it was always fermented. The ghee was fermented. Their cheese was always fermented. They didn't drink big glasses of milk. They would always just take the milk and then ferment it and culture it, which actually was able to break down the casein and things like that. But that was a very small amount of the diet. The diet was, you know, 90–95% plant-based.
Can you recommend your 5 favorite spices which are considered most important for health that people would use every day?
Yeah, you know, when we talk about that 85% of diseases starts in the digestive system from the Ayurvedic perspective, there is a formula. We call it gentle digest because it's so gentle, and it's 5 spices: ginger, cumin, coriander, fennel, and cardamom. So those are the 5 spices. And each of those spices individually have amazing science to support digestive strength, gas, bloating, indigestion, better elimination, and better lymphatic flow. But when you put them all together, there's this insane, crazy synergy between these herbs that work together. And I've written about the science behind them and what they do, which is really neat. You know, I wrote an article once called something about knocking digestive enzymes, like why you shouldn't use digestive enzymes, because they're just doing the digesting for you, really, right? And then people say, well, you get older, you can't make your digestive enzymes, so we need to take them. That's not really true. And 91% of the people the bile ducts connect with the pancreatic ducts, which have the digestive enzyme, and they go into your intestinal tract together. So if your bile is sludgy because of all the processed food, your digestive enzymes can't go through that tube either in 91% of the people. So it's not that you're not making the enzymes, the tube is blocked, the road is blocked. So the idea is that you would want something to reset digestive function. So these 5 spices, ginger, cumin, coriander, fennel, and cardamom, what they do is they reset your own digestive function so you can get on, get better, get off. You can take them as a capsule, you can cook with them, you can sprinkle it on your food, but those are herbs that will reset your function, reset your digestive fire, and the more stomach acid you make, the more bile you make, and they all work in this beautiful coordinated fashion. So the Ayurvedic approach was reset stomach acid, bile flow, pancreatic duodenal enzymes, get that upper digestive system coordinated, and that's what those 5 spices do. So you're not letting undigested proteins and fats go into your intestinal tract, clogging up your lymphatic system, and start the process of chronic disease.
Okay. Can you overdo consuming spices, and are there any negative side effects?
I think too spicy spices. You know, we think of spice, we think of spicy, but we call it gentle digest because it's really the most gentle combination. It's, you know, ginger, cumin, coriander, fennel, and cardamom. I mean, the only one that has a little bit of kick to it is the ginger, and that's a very, very gentle spice, actually. So when you think of spice, it's not like, you know, Mexican food, spicy food. It isn't like that at all. It's extremely kind and gentle to the intestinal wall, the stomach lining, the small intestine. You know, the Ayurveda was all about caring for the delicate nature of the intestinal lining and the epithelium, basically the skin of your intestinal tract.
I personally drink cardamom tea daily. I love it. I mean, it's so delicious. I mix it, the cardamom with reishi mushrooms. Yeah, and you can add also fennel there. So it's a very delicious drink. I'm just wondering how much of this I can use. Is it, you know, for daily consumption, or I can put a limit on that?
Well, I think the cardamom is so good. It's a natural carminative, which means it helps, you know, knock down the gas. And when you have a lot of microbes in your gut, that's what they do for a living, is they make gas, right? So you want to have something in there to help calm them down a little bit. The fennel, adding that is great because that's a powerful lymphatic mover. So that keeps the lining of your intestinal tract, which is the garbage can, keeping that lymph moving off your intestinal tract so things don't build up, irritate, and inflame your intestinal lining, which is like the cause of most people have an inflamed intestinal lining of, you know, in different, you know, levels, of course, but it's a really big deal. And that's where it all starts. I wrote an article once called the most important half inch in your body. And that's where the lymph on the inside of your intestinal tract meets the lymph on the outside of your intestinal tract. So it's where those two meet, the skin on your intestinal lining on the inside and the lymph on the outside. But the lymph also goes through. There's little collecting ducts that pull off your intestinal wall. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where it all happens, you know. But that can get really out of balance when the upper digestive coordination we just talked about is broken down, and now you're even if you're eating a plant-based diet, it's a lot harder to clobber and irritate your gut when you're eating a plant-based diet. But if you're not breaking those things down, and so many of my patients, they can't eat wheat, dairy, nuts, seeds, grains, legumes. They can't even eat rice. It's become such a problem in our culture of people having such weak digestion. It's a bit scary.
Some studies showed that a large percentage of Ayurvedic preparation tested ingredients didn't contain those listed ingredients. So how can we trust the safety and quality of Ayurvedic preparation?
Well, I would never, I mean, I'm probably going to get clobbered by the Ayurvedic community for saying this, but I would never buy an Ayurvedic herb manufactured in India because there's a little bit of rubber stamping going on. There's a lot of Ayurvedic herbs being grown right here in America now. I have sources. We get all of our herbs organically from India. We have a GMP FDA certified lab. So when we get the herbs, we have to test them for identity. You have to test them for heavy metals. You have to test them for bacteria. You have to test them for everything. And then we put the herbs together in a formula. And we have to test them again as the final product. And then if all those tests meet standards, we then put a label on it and we can sell it. So that's what we use at lifespa.com. They're all GMP certified, they're tested. But when you buy them directly from India with an Indian label on it, or they're packaged in India, you just don't know, because the FDA is really strict here. And if you follow the rules in America, you can't sell toxic stuff. You really can't, because there's testing involved. And so that's one way. There was in the past some journal reports about Ayurvedic herbs being toxic, but that was stuff off the shelf from India, not the stuff that's been FDA certified here. And that's some very, very important piece. So you want to look on the label, GMP, which means good manufacturing practices, FDA GMP certified lab. There has to be that, and then you know that you're safe, because there's laws that they have to follow.
Sure. Thank you so much. My listeners will definitely appreciate this advice.
Yeah.
So where people can find you?
Yeah, I have a website called lifespa.com, lifespa.com, and that's where we prove ancient medical wisdom with modern science. And we have thousands and thousands of articles for free. All the information, knowledge is for free. And then, so we help people kind of bring their health back. And then, of course, we have a store where people can buy the LifeSpa products, the ones we just talked about as well. And you can sign up for my newsletter. We do podcasts, and I interview people once a month that are way smarter than me to help. Interviewed Dr. John McDougall not too long ago. It was a great interview. So there's a lot of information there, particularly if you like the idea that, ancient wisdom, time-tested wisdom with modern science. If I can find science to prove an ancient principle, I'm going to write about it. I really feel like something we need to look at. Doesn't mean you have to do that, but at least you have something that, like in Western science, coffee is good, coffee is bad, soy is good, soy is bad. You can sort of prove whatever you want, and it's very confusing. But when you have thousands of years of time-tested science and modern science, it makes me feel a lot more comfortable.
Do you consult patients online?
Yes, I do. Not online, but I have we do Skype consultations, and I still do, believe it or not, see patients after all these years. I've been seeing patients my whole practice, and I really feel like that's partly why I can develop product, because I've been working with my patient. I know it works and I know it doesn't work. So when I give them an herb, it has to work. Otherwise, I don't have patients, right? So that's, I think, an important piece when you look for a product company. You want to have products from someone who's actually in practice, so they actually are there. Because the laboratory design products, they don't work. I mean, I've just seen it over the years. The best science can add up to a product. You put all the joint formulas in herb, boswellia, MSM, joint chondroitin, glucosamine, you put it all in there and it doesn't really work. But then when you look at Ayurvedic principles, they say, well, let's take a little bit of turmeric. Let's add 1 part black pepper to 16 parts turmeric. They measure the absorption. It increased the absorption of that turmeric by 2,000%. That was done 15 years ago. And that's why today turmeric or cumin is sold in conjunction with black pepper or bioprene extracts. That came from Ayurvedic research. But they went and said, let's take an extract of the turmeric and an extract of the black pepper and make it even better. And I'm going like, 2,000% is good enough for me. Take the whole plant, and mix those whole plants in an intelligent, time-tested way. And I've written articles about the difference between that formula versus the extracts. And extracts are sterile. They have no bugs in them. And bugs, believe it or not, are good. We get our microbes from the foods that we eat. And if you sterilize them, they're sterile. And the microbes have a synergistic relationship with the herbs. So when you take herbs that are organic and certified, you're really inoculating your gut with a special new type of microbial diversity, which in the West we all desperately need.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. John, for being with us today and sharing your knowledge and wisdom. And I'd like to encourage our viewers to take time and check out John's website, lifespa.com. And before you book your next appointment with a doctor, and with his guidance, you can switch to a better lifestyle. So thank you, Dr. John, for being with us today.
Thank you. Very appreciative. Thank you so much.
And I'd like to thank our viewers. Stay healthy always. I'm your host, Angelina Kardash, and thank you for being with us.